Dear Martin, thank you so much for your time and availability to meet and talk with me.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Martin, you and I now know each other for a while, and though I can place authors in clear environments and segments, your talent defines such classifications, placing you as a force that transcends the traditional definitions. I see you as a scholar and yet a student. You master your art, and still I hear you studying as a pupil with commitment on a daily basis. You're a general in knowing and see what is about to happen, and yet I hear you as a soldier, willing and to deliver whatever is asked from you. A devoted craftsman that shows the highest commitment to his mission. Martin, I always wanted to ask you this, but who inspired you at the beginning of your journey?
First and foremost, I want to just address something that you kindly said there about taking on different roles and being flexible in approach to things. And I think if that's what you observe from outside, that I can be a teacher or be a student, be a leader, but also be willing to follow, then that's something that I'm very glad to hear. So I'm aiming to have no barriers to learning or to self-development, and that does mean being able to be flexible and to have all elements in balance. With the learning, I think all those circumstances can give you an opportunity to grow and to learn. So I think that it's having an open mind and being free of any barriers to improvement or to a clear vision of things makes a big difference. Now, at the beginning of the journey, are you talking about the journey as in freemasonry or as in self-development in general? Which is
It's a good question. I would like to start from your self-development. We will touch the Freemasonry journey a little later in the conversation.
Certainly. So, when I was very young, I always had this sort of sense there was more potential from the very beginning, and obviously I didn't quite understand about sort of the concept of an adept or a bodhisattva or something like that. But when I started practicing martial arts, and I started very young, then I started to tune in to the self-development aspects very quickly. So I liked to be able to control my body and to be able to achieve these physical things. As soon as I learned about meditation, as soon as I learned about techniques for the breathing techniques and energetic techniques, that was where my focus went. So my heroes at the time were martial arts instructors that I knew. But pretty soon, I started to explore outside that. And I think a big thing happened in my early teens. I must have been like 13 or 14. And I got a copy of a book by an author called Franz Bardon.
Yeah.
And this was like a sort of coming home to a tradition or a way of practicing, a universal vision, if it were, of training that I knew existed. As soon as I read this, it was exactly the way for me. So I read everything written by Franz Bardon. I read everything written by students or around this tradition, and I started practicing. And it's a systematic form of meditative training that is progressive, a really complete method of self-perfection. And it took me about a year to be able to get that stabilized. It was a bit start, stop, start, stop. But after a while, I got the routine of training for an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, every day. And this has been the greatest commitment of my life, but it's also been the greatest gift. It really has been such a blessing to have found the direction I wanted to go in and to find such brilliant instruction so early on. Well, yes. First and foremost, I want to just address something that you kindly said there about taking on different roles and being flexible in approach to things. And I think if that's what you observe from outside, that I can be a teacher or be a student, be a leader, but also be willing to follow, then that's something that I'm very glad to hear. So I'm aiming to have no barriers to learning or to self-development, and that does mean being able to be flexible and to have all elements in balance. With the learning, I think all those circumstances can give you an opportunity to grow and to learn. So I think that it's having an open mind and being free of any barriers to improvements or to a clear vision of things makes a big difference. Now, at the beginning of the journey, are you talking about the journey as in freemasonry or as in self-development in general? Which is it?
It's a good question. I would like to start from your self-development. We will touch the Freemasonry journey a little later in the conversation.
Certainly. So, when I was very young, I always had this sort of sense there was more potential from the very beginning. And obviously I didn't quite understand about sort of the concept of an adept or a bodhisattva or something like that. But when I started practicing martial arts, and I started very young, then I started to tune in to the self-development aspects very quickly. So I liked to be able to control my body and to be able to achieve these physical things. As soon as I learned about meditation, as soon as I learned about techniques for the breathing techniques and energetic techniques, that was where my focus went. So my heroes at the time were martial arts instructors that I knew. But pretty soon, I started to explore outside that, and I think a big thing happened in my early teens. I must have been like 13 or 14, and I got a copy of a book by an author called Franz Barden.
Yeah.
And this was like a sort of coming home to a tradition or a way of practicing a universal vision, if it were, of training that I knew existed. As soon as I read this, it was exactly the way for me. So I read everything written by Franz Barden. I read everything written by students or around this tradition. I started practicing, and it's a systematic form of meditative training that is progressive, a really complete method of self-perfection. And it took me about a year to be able to get that stabilised. It was a bit start, stop, start, stop. But after a while, I got the routine of training for an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, every day. And this has been the greatest commitment of my life, but it's also been the greatest gift. It really has been such a blessing to have found the direction I wanted to go in and to find such brilliant instruction so early on.
It's fascinating, having been inspired so young, Martin. I like it. I like the fact that you have committed yourself to such a journey where you learn the art of meditation, martial arts, that is still about inner balance, Freemasonry. Goldoni defined one of his character as the servant of two masters. This character was smarter than his bosses, and he ended up managing them rather than being managed by them. About these arts that you are mastering, do you see yourself as a man seeking more truth via each one of these arts? Or are you using these arts to find the single truth?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. So, most certainly, I'm looking for the single truth. And from outside, I can understand it looks like I'm doing lots of different things. But let me explain. So, that's that course of instruction I was telling you about.
Yeah.
Imagine this, I've got diaries from that time. Every single day I've recorded my performance and fine-tuned things as I progressed. If I ever get to a point in that training where I reach a plateau and I can't progress in the way I'd expect to, I'll look for someone who specializes in the next step for me. And that could mean that I'm visiting the Czech Republic, or it could mean I'm visiting Japan or India, and that's what I'm seeking. I want to spend time with someone who's better at what I'm seeking to do. Now, this seems to have leveled off now. It seems that sort of inspiration helps guide me sort of nowadays, and that I haven't really needed to go and learn from anyone else for quite a while. But if you look on my YouTube channel or read any of my books and think, well, why was he there? You know, why is he training under this teacher and then that one? That's why. It's all to do with the next step in my progress. I think we can find balance in life very much by practicing the things we find hardest, not just focusing on the things we find very easy. And often the reason I think I've really benefited from very generous teachers is because I'm actually going into an area which is not my natural inclination, and is something that they're fabulously talented at, but they're a weak spot for me. And I think that's been a great way of doing things.
Thank you, Martin. Let's now explore the Freemasonry part for 1 second. We saw your personal journey. How did you meet Freemasonry, or did Freemasonry meet you?
I met Freemasonry. So what was happening was Freemasonry kept appearing in what I was studying. So in life, you've probably met different people who have great, exciting interests. There are people who they really love to study particular areas, or there's people that really like to do things. They make crafts and they're always tinkering around. Maybe you know someone who's really into models, or someone who likes to look at a telescope at the sky. So whether it's paints that they're really close to and they know the different colours and textures and special ways of putting them on to their models to be able to make it look real, or whether it's how to specially adjust that telescope so they can just see further and more clearly than anyone else, they have really gone into something with the whole of their heart. Now, for me, it's all about consciousness. Consciousness is my paint and my telescope. It's what I'm really tuned into and what my calling is here. The ability to get the most out of our own consciousness and our own presence here. So if you read around these areas, you find Freemasonry starts to appear again and again. This society that cultivates virtue and memorizes and performs these ancient traditional rituals. It was actually reading about another order, an order which is for Freemasons, that finally made me think, right, I'm going to explore this. It was the Society Rosicrucia in Anglia, the SRA. And I thought, right, I'm going to become a Freemason. This is this society that's helping secretly behind the scenes, doing charitable things and cultivating the best characteristics in themselves, so they're the best person they can be in the world. That sounds wonderful. And the way it was written, it was like the Jedi, you know, that they were really existed hidden behind the scenes. And I was quite young at the time. I was probably too young to join in retrospect. But I remember just seeing a Masonic temple. And I went up to it and I knocked on the door. And at the time, I didn't realise the symbolism of it. The aim was to talk to someone in there. Later on, years later, I mentioned to someone that I'd always been interested in this, and it turned out they were a Freemason. And as if by magic, many people appeared around me. I don't know why, they were all dentists. Whether there's some connection there. But yes, they were all Freemasons. So I had 2 invitations to join different lodges, and I ended up joining in London, Burlington Lodge, number 96, and it was the right choice. Wow. After my initiation, there was a fabulous festive board, and the initiation was very moving, very inspiring. Now, back in those days, there were no lodge mentors officially.
Yeah.
Your proposed and seconded would sort of be there for you, but I was very lucky to be introduced to the right people for what I was interested in. So 4 times a year, I'd go to Burlington, and I'd be there. I'd be the first person there, and I'd learn everything exactly. I was sort of so genuinely engaged. And then afterwards, I discovered that it was a Burlington tradition that goes right back into the 1700s to get drunk. But we wouldn't just get drunk. I was given philosophical works. I met people who was excited about the things I was aiming to do as they were about their own goals.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful thing to be introduced to. So yes, that's how I came to Freemasonry. I knocked on the door, and I'm very glad to say the door was opened.
Martin, I have participated to some of your lectures, and as you progress in Freemasonry, your knowledge went into depth. And one of the elements that fascinated me when you across the different lecture was the memory palace aspect. The human mind is a fascinating universe we don't master yet. Still, some do better than others. Martin, it's possible. Can you tell me not just about the memory palace, can you tell me about your memory palace?
Wow, that's a very interesting question, and no one has ever asked that before. Isn't that amazing? So I have many memory palaces, and I also got a lot of memory tricks. So memory is very much about working with your mind and learning, and we're talking about making things of and perfecting in an art. So this is the art of forming things in your consciousness, memory, really. So as far as palaces go, your own house is normally the best memory palace you could start off with. And I'm no exception. If anything mundane or anything which is list-based, I'll use my house. But not just my house. The first memory palace instructions ever described in the British, in the English language, is using a memory palace of your house, but having one for every colour of the rainbow.
Oh.
So that's quite interesting. It's like it gives you variations. You've got one memory palace, which is the normal one, and then you've got one in each rainbow colour. Now, at this point, I think it's important, before I carry on, that for anyone watching this who doesn't know what a memory palace is, I don't want to go really in depth assuming, a memory palace is an imaginary building that you use as a filing system if you want to recall something. So you imagine the building. I was talking about my house, and you practice walking a route around that house again and again, always stopping at the same places. So your house could be walk to the front door, that's place 1. Your coat hanger on the inside, or the coat hooks on the inside of your porch, that's place 2. Place 3, the door that goes into your living room, but don't do too many doors. Then your settee could be place 3, your fireplace, place 4. So you could do things like that, and how you progress through that house should be in a route that doesn't double back if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
So and doesn't repeat too much. That's why maybe I was thinking maybe we'll drop the second door, because otherwise you mix things up.
Yeah.
So a memory palace, that's the standard, but you can use other things. So if you were to look in traditional Indian literature, they tend to use memory on the body. They use their body as a memory palace. You could see how that would work really well, especially if you're learning things about the human. The zodiac is a very easy thing to apply to your body as a memory palace.
Yeah.
So if you want to remember the zodiac in order, you can think of Aries. Well, that's obviously going to be of your head here. You can think about Taurus, the bull. That would be, think of the wide neck, on the bull. That would be your neck. You can think about Gemini, where your arms are very much sort of Gemini. Cancer, you can think about how your chest is like the shell of a crab. Leo, the lion, you can think about that, how your heart is like the heart of a lion. Virgo, you can think about the essence, sort of just in your very center of purity, the spark that's beyond this. Libra, you can think about your hips. And the balance there. You could probably find something around that kind of area that would connect you with Scorpio.
Yeah.
In some way. If you were to go further down, you can start to apply things like the bow of Sagittarius to the legs, and Capricorn to the knees, the water bearer to the calves, the Pisces, your feet can be fish. So this is the kind of system that you can use with the body. So that's what I would use for mundane things, and that's what sort of I do for general memory work. But for something that involves a change, so memory can be used to change your character or improve skills, something which is, to me, part of this sort of sacred duty to keep improving yourself and to evolve as a being. I use the zodiac and the decans of the zodiac, and these have very traditional memory images for them. Think about it. The zodiac was probably the first memory palace. Someone was sitting there trying to identify different areas of the sky and drawing the dots. In order to be able to make areas memorable.
Well, those were not the only one. Let me talk about some of my fellow countrymen, Giordano Bruno. And recently we were talking about your work in rediscovering his system and how little is used in modern techniques. Can you tell me something about this system? And we didn't prepare this, but I would like to challenge you with one of the letters eventually of the alphabet.
Oh my word! Okay, so Bruno, his he would use memory in very natural, very brilliant ways. We talked about memory palaces. Well, sometimes there are circumstances where you can just form a memory palace very easily to learn something. If you want to learn about plants, your garden is a very good memory palace. There are places like churches that have a lot of information in them, which are memory palaces. So Bruno would use memory methods naturally, but he also loved to study different memory applications and techniques, from fields of memory or grids to be laid out in your mind, that kind of thing. With memory palaces, do you remember I was talking about your house?
Yeah.
Bruno's real secret was to have an object as well as a location. So he would have something which would connect with that place that you would be able to put things together with. So let's imagine the front door. If you were Bruno, you'd put a reef on the front door.
Yeah.
So, and then you'd have a coat on the hanger. So if you had a memory, if you wanted to remember something, you would make some scene involving that.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to remember the life of someone, let's imagine we're going to memorize the life story of someone. Let's say he was a knight. You'd make them take the reef as a shield.
Yeah.
And walk into the next room, and maybe the coat is made of chainmail. You do things like that, and each one of those would be associated with a fact or something. So maybe the knight, the reef would be tie in somehow with when they were born. It would have the date written on it. He'd have memory images for numbers as well. Maybe that kind of thing. So that was his technique. Now, what you're talking about is the wheels.
Correct.
Now, Bruno had studied the works of Raymond Lull, and Lull used these wheels as logic gates, as a means to think things through. Yeah. So you would memorize the wheel, and it would ask you some questions about something. So if logic is maths, those wheels are algebra. It's like creating a computer in your own mind. Bruno took this and applied this in a Neoplatonic sense. So the wheels he has, which are very tricky, are there are two wheels which have got letters all the way around the outside, and the aim is to rotate them and combine them. Now, I'm a person that does everything. I need to read about it. My fiance, bless her, she had sort of 3 months of Raymond Lull and then about 7 of Bruno wheels.
So she's a saint. She's
a saint. So she can probably remember some of the associations now. Yeah. So in order to perform Bruno's memory method, you need to memorize all the letters on the outside, and you have the Latin ones, and then there are some Hebrew and some Greek ones, and they've got a lot of deep association with them. And then you learn to combine them in meditation, and this is to lead to a sort of sense of lifting the consciousness. Now, this is quite hard to explain here, but we'll link to the video where I do a whole video on memory wheels on this. Now, yes, recently, I think you were there where I performed a demonstration of this. It was the first time anyone's ever done this since Bruno. I was very surprised when I was contacted by a Renaissance historian. Yeah. He said to me, wow, no one thought this was actually doable. And so I was. It was quite amazing to hear that. Yeah. So yes, we are bringing the shadow of Bruno's techniques back. So yes, I'm up for the challenge. Let's have a go. If you could form a letter for me, what letter should I?
I will go for the most beautiful one, A for Antonio.
Oh my word! Okay, so in the shadow wheel, the wheel of intentions, which is about how you use your own mind. That wheel is almost like an A, B, C, an alpha to omega. Actually, would be a better way of describing it. A whole set of principles for how to control your consciousness and how to meditate. So A is Bruno's own personal motto. And it's the most important thing that anyone watching this video could take home as a principle of practice for Bruno and understand his system. Bruno believed, like most traditions of meditation, whether they're from the East or West, that if you were to keep your mind on a specific subject without disturbance and without distraction, you would become one with it. So if you and I sat and meditated on forgiveness, we become at one with forgiveness. This would bring blessings to you. Maybe we can meditate on healing, and that would bring healing to us. Maybe we could meditate on strength, and that would bring strength to us. And he represented this using a biblical quote, which was, I sat under the shadow of he who I loved, and the fruits were sweet to me. Now, this is about the whole section is says, amongst all the trees in the woods, the apple tree is the most pleasant and the most beautiful. Amongst all the men in the world, my love is the most pleasant and most beautiful, like the tree. I sat under the shadow of him who I adored, and their fruits were sweet to me. So Bruno's taking this in a kind of inspirational sense, that we could get in touch with the original idea of something through meditation. So that's the outer wheel. The inner wheel, if we were to put A to A, is actually this is called the conception wheel. These are facts about the world that Bruno says they're from the peripatetic, from the Aristotelian tonic, but they're actually more hermetic. I think he's being a bit careful. But so this one, the A on the inside wheel, is telling you a quote from Plotinus, which Bruno says is the prince of the Neoplatonic practitioners. And the quote is saying that our eyes, our organs of sense, are made to help us tune into things and to understand things. Your eyes naturally adjust so you can see right in the light, and that you've got an inner sense that does this. Later on in that same wheel, he actually does tell you that under the letter S, he tells you that this is a quote from the Hermetica, that you need to close down these outer senses in order for your inner senses to be able to express themselves. So Bruno would want us to combine those two. So that's quite an interesting thing. He wants, if we were to combine A and A in meditation, the principle that you can sit under the shadow of something and achieve samadhi or oneness, Bruno called it contraction. The same principle as samadhi, really. You can achieve oneness. And the principle that within us, there is a part of us that can naturally tune in to that kind, or to higher things, just like our senses do. So we were to combine them, we discover that this is a natural process. This isn't a hard discipline or anything artificial. And that would happen in reality just if we let it. So if you and I sat under the oak tree and let our mind rest, and we would come at one with that scent of the oak tree, maybe we'd receive that strength. Maybe in life we can see that the more someone thinks about something, the more they become like that.
Yeah.
So maybe we'd sort of think this is a natural process that's happening. Maybe I want to watch the right things for who I want to be. I want to hear the right words for what I want to be happening inside. One thing that's really helped with that is one of his students, Alexander Dixon.
Yeah.
This is very interesting. We're talking about Freemasonry.
Correct.
And here's the Masonic sort of connection. Shaw, from the Shaw Statutes, published right at the end of the 1600s, writes a set of rules for stonemasons. And these Shaw Statutes say that the stonemasons need to practice the art of memory.
Ah.
Now, that art is a very specific set of techniques. It's talking about memory palaces. William Shaw was a member of the royal court, James the First, or the future James the First. And we know that Bruno's apprentice, his greatest student, Alexander Dixon, was in that court. And that does open up the possibility of there being an influence of Bruno on what the stonemasons were doing. That's what people have been speculating and thinking about.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the student wrote a memory manual. It's a wonderful thing. Bruno's book was called The Shadow of Ideas. The student wrote The Shadow of Logic and Reason. Now, Bruno is very poetic, and he hides his teachings. It's a hard time to be able to be such a genius and a free thinker. He's a very passionate individual. He's got all that wonderful enthusiasm that comes from Italy, and his works are very exciting and full of that energy. Dixon isn't quite like that. He's a bit more plain speaking and less guarded. So he describes the techniques that Bruno is talking about. He describes them in easier, not easy, easier to understand terms.
Yeah.
So that's helped a lot. And